is proudly brought to you by the National Center for Wellness.
Stress decreases oxytocin levels and interferes with breastfeeding. And that was really what got me into this whole interest of what's happening hormonally, which when you start following reference lists from one article to another, you rapidly begin to see, oh, and neurologically.
Right.
And has brought me to this place of just saying, wow, the healthcare profession has missed something in really understanding this relationship between the skin-to-skin contact, neurodevelopment, which also means brain development, and development of the forebrain and the social brain, versus when we separate our infants, you get development of the more primitive midbrain, which is the fight or flight portion of the brain and leads to more aggression. When that part of the brain is developed, it also leads to depression, suicide, bullying, any sorts of aggressive behavior, and other mental illnesses. And they're now linking the levels of oxytocin that an infant has to severity of autism and attention deficit disorder.
I've definitely seen videos about what happens when you separate, and they sadly did this with monkeys.
Right.
And separated the monkeys from their mothers and whatnot, and how they turned very aggressive and inward and socially inept, and just sad in terms of a comparison of what the monkey could have and would have naturally been.
Well, and that's where it's so frustrating having looked at all of this literature and to realize those are Harlow's monkeys that they started with, which I learned about in my psych classes when I was in college. But somehow or other, all of this work, because a lot of the psychoneuroendocrinology has been done in psychology, not in medicine or healthcare. We have all this wonderful things to say what's happening. And it's been confirmed on humans, not just animal research, but it hasn't translated over into what we're doing and how we care for our mothers and babies.
Right. It's sad. It's crazy.
Yeah.
For as far as we are for the 21st century, for that to be the case is we'll look back and wonder what took so long.
Right. And what I've learned is that in many respects, our current practices, while we do them because we're trying to make the experience better or make sure nothing happens, are really ultimately harmful to mother and baby. Now, for a long time, we've heard of this insufficient milk syndrome that many moms have. And I'm like, oh, now I can say no fooling. Because if you don't breastfeed frequently in the first 48 hours or so, you're not going to make as much milk.
Right. Wow.
So, so here are these moms who haven't had a lot of experience go home, not sure what's going on. And then they come back later going, well, I'm not making enough milk. Well, probably not, because we didn't get you set up to make enough milk or give you the confidence to continue breastfeeding.
Well, makes total sense. You talk about all the different ways that we interrupted. Now you talk about psychoneuroendocrinology, which means psycho your mind, how your mind causes between the nerves in your brain the connection to the response of the hormones in your body. Mm-hmm. You talk about stress, the biggest stress hormone being cortisol.
Right.
I find it interesting that cortisol is made from the pathway from progesterone. But can you talk about the interaction of cortisol and its impact on oxytocin? How stress, and how it can interrupt labor.
Right.
But how it can interrupt the mechanisms involved with making breast milk, or can you talk a little bit about cortisol in general and oxytocin?
Cortisol, when you're frightened, anxious, pain, any number of things like that, increases. And we do know that cortisol can block oxytocin when it gets into high levels. Now, there are other times when they work together, but in the case of labor, if you go in not knowing what to expect, being real fearful about contractions, and just keeping the muscles real tight, that's all related to this cortisol, which then interferes literally with that oxytocin working. So one of the things that we see in labor sometimes is that moms who are having a hard time dilating or getting their cervix to open up, you'll give them a little bit of Nicental or Nubain, one of the synthetic narcotics, and all of a sudden they'll relax, and you've got a baby coming in 45 minutes. Well, but if we go back to some of those things that we talked about before that increase the oxytocin levels, so warm showers, how much do those help you? Or warm baths? Talk about a relaxation.
Right.
Having somebody rub your feet or
Shoulders.
rub your shoulders or whatever. These things are all triggering that release of oxytocin and helping with the relaxation, which decreases, or the oxytocin in high enough amounts literally blocks the cortisol and the other stress hormones.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of the same thing that's happening with breastfeeding. You've got moms who are anxious about breastfeeding anyway.
Right.
But when they haven't held their babies initially, when they've been separated and babies go to the nursery or they're just not there in the room, then each of these becomes a place where that cortisol can come in. Absolutely. And begin to interfere with the oxytocin. If we can keep that oxytocin level high, that's why moms feel sleepy after they breastfeed or feel much more relaxed. They find that sitting down to feed baby becomes something like you wouldn't believe, just because
a nice
you get relaxed. Yeah, exactly. It's a relaxing moment. And I really think in order to cope, so to speak, with infants growing, crying, all those things that come with parenting, getting that oxytocin going and helping to decrease the stress is very helpful for the whole thing.